And what time is it?
It is 9:02.
Okay,
Okay, it's started.
ready? Okay, I want to welcome everybody and call the meeting to order. And I have received confirmation the quorum is present. Are there any guests who would like to be recognized at this time? Okay, there are none. Are there any member updates that members would like to give at this time? Okay, apparently there are none there also. Are there any public comments from the public that anyone in the public would like to give at this time? Are we okay now?
Yeah.
All right. Apparently there are none there. So we need to view and approve the minutes of the meeting from November 30th. Any corrections to the minutes?
Actually, I'm sorry, real quick. December 16th,
Okay, December 16th.
2025,
Sorry, it's December 16th,
2021.
2021 is the minutes that we're approving. My error. Okay. Are there any corrections to those minutes, December 16th, 2021? If not, can I have a motion to accept the minutes as written? Anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Levi.
Second.
Okay, Gilbert seconded.
Okay.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Is Sarah up?
Hi,
Yes,
here.
Sarah. All right. Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, would you like to give us an update, please?
So actually, I do not have one today.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a short one.
No, that's all right. Thanks a lot. Okay, Annette,
Yes.
I think you're next.
Yes, for agenda item 7, I would
Oh, I
like,
forgot Richard. We were going to plug Richard in there.
yeah, that's fine. No, I can go ahead and introduce
Okay,
Richard.
ahead.
So for agenda item 7, we will be talking about the membership of our subcommittees as they relate to a potential quorum for the entire planning group. But before I do that, I would like to ask if Richard could give us an update on Water Development Board. This was one of the items that we had talked about previously, just in terms of what we need to do moving forward when we have these meetings. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to Richard to talk about any other updates that are occurring within Water Development Board.
Thank you, Annette. Hi, everyone. This is Richard Bagans with the Water Development Board. A couple updates for everyone. So your consultants, AECOM, did submit their technical memorandum by the required deadline on January 7th, and it was deemed administratively complete, and they received a notice to proceed with task 5, which allows you guys all to start. Once you guys start identifying and evaluating projects, you all are allowed to start recommending them as well. And reminder to submit the March 7th Tech Memo extension deliverables that were largely geodatabase files as well. For the contract amendments for the additional funding, all regions have been on hold within internal review in TWDB, but those have just been cleared and are about to start routing again with some minor administrative edits to the contracts. So Annette and I have been in contact and will be working to make sure that those get executed soon. For the officer elections, I know Annette sent out the election notice that was supposed to happen today, but it's not on the agenda. And I realize you guys will be having it at your second meeting in the year. And so just recognizing that that's part of the bylaws, not rule requirements, but bylaws is what mandates or asks that you guys have your officer elections annually at the first meeting every year. And lastly, the chair's conference call. The next one is looking to be in early March. We'll be sending out an invite soon for those. And largely, we are looking to have our legal team gives a presentation on some update or some guidance on the Open Meetings Act. Thanks to a lot of questions coming from this region. And that brings us to this agenda item. Who's ever controlling the screen, can you scroll down just a little bit? So I can see. Perfect. So discussion on membership from subcommittees. So after some guidance from TWDB, it's the quorum issues relates to the having a full group, a quorum of the full RPG group present within a subcommittee meeting. So that means if you guys have 6 members of any of you guys anywhere discussing planning related business, it would, or 7, whatever the full group quorum is, based on your current membership, that would be required to be posted as a full group meeting. While at some of these subcommittees, you guys have a large number of people on the subcommittees, and they're posted as subcommittees. So kind of 2 directions that you guys are recommended to take: either limit the amount of voting members attending the subcommittees for optimum efficiency and discussion, and keep posting them as subcommittees. Or if you would like to have a quorum of the full group attending and having discussions, potentially posting them as full group meetings with a very brief agenda, potentially 1 or 2 agenda items focused on those particular discussion items. But this kind of clears the issue about having a full group quorum within a posted subcommittee, which is the kind of glaring red flag. Annette, if you want to take it from here.
Thank you, Richard. So I think that subcommittee 2 is the only subcommittee that we will run into this issue, because we have 9 participating. And I think that we have our next meeting coming up between March 14th through the 18th. And so I just wanted to throw it out there to see if with subcommittee 2 covering potential projects, there being a lot of discussion, I would ask if you all would be in favor. We would just use that opportunity to have a planning group meeting, and we would only talk about the issues that would relate to subcommittee 2 at that time. I haven't discussed this with AECOM. Brian, I don't know if you see that that would be any sort of hindrance for you where we would go straight to the planning committee. I think one thing that could be positive from that is there wouldn't need to be a recommendation, because the planning group would vote on it right there, and that would be some finality. But does anybody want to bring any concerns to the floor or have any discussion on this item?
No concerns from my end. As long as AECOM is okay with it, I think we should do it.
I think it makes sense. Chris, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that that would be fine from our end.
And Richard, you're okay with that?
No issues.
if you guys are allowed to have a quorum of the full RPG, if it was posted as a full RPG meeting to the public on the website and the Secretary of State's website.
Right, with an agenda that's limited to subcommittee 2 functions.
You guys can work with the chair to set the agenda, yes.
Okay, all right, good.
And then just to confirm, one more time on our subcommittees, we, again, we have, well, on subcommittee 1, we do have 6. On subcommittee 2, we have 9. On subcommittee 3, we have 6. And subcommittee 4, we have 7. So I was under the impression that the other ones were a smaller group, but in terms of subcommittee 1, 3, and 4, Brian, when do you anticipate these meetings occurring? Because I know it seems like we've been focusing predominantly on subcommittee 2.
So we don't anticipate any further meetings with subcommittee 1. Given that our goals have been approved. So we're going to be focusing more on subcommittees 2 and 3 over the next couple of months. The next subcommittee 3 meeting, I think we were planning for the week of February 21st through the 24th. And then the next subcommittee 2 meeting, we were planning for the week of March 14th through the 18th. And then as far as subcommittee 4 goes, we were discussing sort of given in light of the quorum requirements and the logistics of bringing everyone together, it may make more sense to rethink the need for subcommittee 4 unless the group would like to continue the idea of having one. We're open to going with more of a working group approach where we just reach out to individuals and sort of compile. The subcommittee 4, by the way, was intended to be a focus on task 8, which is the administrative, regulatory, and legislative update recommendations. So we were considering the possibility of just coordinating with interested individuals separately and compiling those recommendations and presenting them to the large group rather than forming a specific subcommittee. So that's an option, just to kind of make the quorum issue a little bit easier. So that's kind of what we're thinking in terms of the future subcommittees.
Okay, and before we go any further, I think Sal, did you want to say something? I thought I saw your mic open.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. No, I was just in agreement with what you all just discussed, and I just emailed the signed minutes.
Okay. Is there, do you all think that it'd be too long of a meeting, AECOM, if we combined 2 and 3? And just had agenda items only focusing on those initiatives for the planning group?
Chris, what do you?
I think that would probably be about a 2-hour meeting. We try to keep it no longer than that if we could avoid it. I think we've kind of got through the bulk of the I guess we call it the hard part, where we wanted to get ideas from the group. We want to get stakeholders in the room. We sort of had a workshop already, which was sort of a 3-hour brainstorming session of coming up with these ideas. So, moving forward, I think that they can be a little bit more concise. So I think combining 2 and 3, really what we're going to be, where we're heading is that, we're starting the evaluations now for 2 and 3, and then it's going to turn into discussions about recommendations. So yeah, I think it kind of makes sense to combine both of them, and then just they'll sort of morph into this task 5, which is more focused on what do we recommend after performing the evaluations. So to sum it up, yeah, I think that we could do that and still kind of limit the maximum meeting length to about 2 hours if we combine those.
And so I know that AECom they would like to have another planning group meeting at the end of this month. Is that, if we focus subcommittee 2 and 3 agenda items only at that time for that meeting, would that be appropriate, or were you all wanting to cover other items as well?
I think that the subcommittee 3 meeting we have planned for the 21st through the 24th. We could probably still focus that mainly on subcommittee 3 and just provide a brief update on where we are with the subcommittee 2, the FMPs. But yeah, we could have a general meeting and just have the main focus of that general meeting be the FMEs and those discussion items.
Okay, so then it sounds like from the group that we are in agreement that we'll go ahead and utilize the planning group as the vehicle to get these items through from the subcommittees. The next one that's coming up on the 28th, I think is what we're proposing for the date. That will be more heavy on subcommittee 3 agenda items. And then with us wanting to look at subcommittee 2 in mid-March, then I think that's where we'll do another planning group meeting to be able to focus on those items as well. And I think that it really is maybe the most beneficial to go this route, because I oftentimes I'm in the other situation where we don't have enough members to form these subcommittees. And so it was a very difficult process to try to turn people away. So I would rather you all have the option to participate than us be under the gun trying to figure out who's going to be there or not, because that might be your opportunity to voice a concern that you've just realized during the planning session. So if that's okay, then we'll go ahead and focus the planning group meeting on the 28th on subcommittee 3 items primarily. There will be some other items where we include the minutes or perhaps some other administrative requirements that will help us move the process along. But if we can, we'll focus primarily on 3, so that way we can get you out on time.
So that means 14 to 17. 2 will also be a general.
I think yes.
Okay, all right. So there's 2 of them then, pretty close together. Okay.
So we'll be looking at the planning group meeting, and another one in February the 28th, and then another one somewhere between the 14th and 18th of March, as I understand it from the group.
Focusing on 2.
Focusing on 2, yes, sir.
The only comment I think I wanted to make here, and Brian can jump in if he agrees or disagrees, but I think we had the next general RFPG meeting schedule. We were targeting the 28th, which was a week before the tech memo is going to be due. I'm sorry, the geodatabase portion of the tech memo. If you recall, they split it up into 2, TWDB kind of split it up into 2 separate deliverables. And the geodatabase portion is due March 7th. So we were hoping to have our next general RFPG meeting on the 28th of February. So I guess, Brian, what are your thoughts on, since we were targeting the week before that, the 21st through the 25th for the subcommittee 3 meeting, if that's going to be a general meeting, maybe we just push, we don't have a meeting the 21st to the 25th. Instead, we just combine it all on that 28th, the week of, or on February 28th, which is a Monday, rather than have, that subcommittee 3 focused meeting and then followed up with another meeting on Monday, the 28th. We'll just cut out that subcommittee 3 meeting and just have that general RFPG meeting on the 28th.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And just to clarify with Richard, we're assuming that we do need RFPG approval to submit the geodatabase deliverables as well.
Don't remember the exact motion made at the December meeting, but if the motion was just for the January 7th deliverables, then yes, you will need the RFPG approval. Or if the motion was for all tech memo deliverables, you may not need it.
Okay. Well, I
solution.
agree. Yeah, it's makes sense to kind of consolidate everything on the 28th, just to be efficient.
Brian, one comment about your thought on subcommittee 4. I have found that small group dynamic tend to have ideas motivated by people hearing other people discuss subjects. And it might be useful to start out, like you said, and see if there's a good response individually. And then if you don't get a reasonable response that you expect individually, maybe we can have a meeting with that subcommittee group, and try to stimulate people's thoughts by discussion.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so then I think we have a game plan, and obviously if things look like they're not working as we had hoped for, then we can we can look at something else. But I do see Gilbert Saldana has a question or a comment.
Yes, thanks, Annette. I had a question and I just wanted to understand or think about the logistics of the situation if a general meeting and a subcommittee meeting is posted. And if we don't have enough to meet a quorum for the full group, but do have enough for a subcommittees, what would be the I guess the course of action at that point?
Well, if we had, so with the subcommittees, I think that we haven't been running into the issue where we just have enough for a quorum. We've been fortunate enough to where we've pretty much maxed out on everyone who signed up for it. So either we post a subcommittee agenda or we post a planning group, but we're not going to do both. I don't know, I'm answering the question, but I don't think that we'll run into the issue that you're raising, because if we make a decision collectively today that we're only going to use the planning group as a venue, then we just need our 6 members for the quorum. And then we'll talk about those specific agenda items that relate to the subcommittees.
Okay.
Our problem was the last 2 meetings, we had to ask people to leave the meeting who were interested in being in the meeting. And there were at least 2, I think that 2 or 3 in each one of those meetings that we had to ask to leave. And we're interested in trying to allow them to be present. We've had really good attendance at subcommittee 2s. I know that, and 1 also.
Did that answer your question, Gilbert, or maybe?
Yeah, no, I just thought, that if we didn't have enough for a full group, I guess, then if, we would just still proceed with the subcommittee if we had the quorum for that. But it sounds like we wouldn't have that issue.
No. Well, we won't even be able to do, understand what you're saying now, but we won't be able to do that because we won't have met the posting requirements, which is 7 days before. And so that we wouldn't be allowed to run the meeting then.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was just going to ask if we could, we don't have to confirm it right now, but maybe in an email or something after this meeting, if we could just nail down what the specific number of regional flood planning group members is that qualifies for a quorum, if it's 6 or 7, just based on the current membership. Because we will try to schedule a few meetings where we get smaller groups together to coordinate on specific issues. So we just want to make sure we don't bust that criteria on.
Yes, and so we do have 6 as our quorum, but we will be at the next meeting presenting 2 more members. We do have nominations for agriculture and General Electric. So I will get that confirmed with you, Chris, after I speak with Richard, just to make sure that we're of the same understanding, and I'll get that information to you.
And then a jump from 6 to 7 then for a quorum. Okay.
Okay, well then,
Thanks.
there aren't other items. I think that'll take care of that agenda item. Oh, we do have a question. Delbert has a question.
Just real quick, because I think when Richard spoke earlier, he said voting members, and me as a non-voting member, do I or do I not count towards that total? what happened last time.
So you, as a subcommittee member, you do have voting powers to recommend, but as a planning group member, you would stay ex officio. So you're on both sides.
Okay.
So if we had a general
Thank you.
meeting address subcommittee 2, he would be included in the quorum. Because he's
It
a
would
voting
be,
member.
it would, sorry,
Subcommittee.
I'm not
It's
supposed
up
to
to-
give advice, but it would be, if it's posted as a full group RPG meeting, at full group RPG meetings, it's the number of voting members present, excluding vacancies.
Yeah, and Delbert would not be included in that one. Yeah.
At a posted full RPG meeting, no.
Not to disparage any of the work and effort that you do, Delbert. We appreciate everything. So please don't take it any
That's
other.
all right. I'm used to being a complicating factor, but that's cool. Thank you. I understand. Appreciate it.
Okay. Your administrative expenses. then?
Yes. Okay. So the next agenda item that I have for you all today are the expense request for AECom. And so let me go ahead and click on that hyperlink. So we've only done this twice. So this is, once before, so this is only our second time. The first time we did include expenses from the Council of Governments as well as AECom, but for today's presentation, we're only asking for planning group approval for the expenses incurred for AECom. And this will be for the period of November 1st through December 31st of 2021. So the total amount that they're requesting for reimbursement is $154,247.71. And just to let you know where we are in terms of the contract and remaining funds, of the $1,021,800 that was allocated to AECom, we look to see a remaining balance of $460,683.99 with this request. And so are there any questions for me or for AECom pertaining to any of these expenses as shown on the document?
No issues here.
Okay.
Do we need a motion to?
Yes.
something?
So moved.
Second.
May I get a
So
motion?
moved.
Accept. I'm sorry,
Jen?
who did the motion?
I did.
Okay, thank you. And a second?
Omar.
Okay, thank you. You guys are ahead of me. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion passes.
Okay, and we will now turn it over to AECom so they can go ahead and give their presentation and they'll take control of the screen. So I will close this out.
All right, thank you, Annette. So today we just have a few updates from the general RFP standpoint, and then we're going to discuss some of the past meetings from subcommittees 2 and 3 that were held in January. So, and also we'll have some actions to vote at the end pertaining to those 2 subcommittees. So as Richard mentioned, we delivered the technical memo early January and did receive the notice to proceed to go forward with task 5. That's pertaining to the recommendations of the FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs. So that's a really big milestone, and wanted to thank everyone for everyone's contributions to get to that point. We held the 2 subcommittees that we'll be discussing later in this meeting, earlier in January. And then also in the next couple slides, we'll talk about the coming months, what our anticipated schedule will be. We have an update on the region-wide Fathom 3-meter flood risk data that we discussed in December on our December 16th meeting. We also have actually next week a couple open house meetings in Pecos and Presidio. And then we have a brief budget update to share. So over the next couple months, like I mentioned, next Wednesday and Thursday, we have Pecos and Presidio Roadshow open house events. And I think we have a slide here. So Pecos is on Wednesday and Presidio is on Thursday. And we have Barracuda, who will be discussing a little bit more about that when we get to that point. Then our next technical memo deliverables, the second round will be due to the Water Development Board by March 7th. And we have planned to submit the geodatabase deliverables to the RPG for review by February 24th. And then we were thinking of raising a motion on the next 28th meeting to approve the submittal of those deliverables on the March 7th deadline. So that's one of our primary focuses this month, and we're also working towards the chapter write-ups for the full RFP. These are some updated dates regarding those deliverables and when we're anticipating submitting those to the RFPG for review. And then everything will come together by July for submittal to the TWDB. So we'll have more clarity on these dates as we in the coming weeks and month or so. In terms of public meetings, we're anticipating another wrap-up meeting in El Paso to cover the whole region, to sort of share our findings and recommendations, any recommendations from the planning group with the public. That's prior to the draft RFP submittal to TWDB. Then we're planning to have a public hearing in El Paso after submittal of draft RFP to obtain public feedback. That will happen in the fall. And then, of course, between fall and early winter, we are going to have, we're going to be incorporating comments from TWDB and the RFPG, as well as the public, or any other final comments that might come up. So that, of course, the final deadline is in January of 2023.
Hey, Brian, just a thought. The El Paso wrap-up public meeting that's proposed for May and the public hearing in August, September, are those only in El Paso, or are they going to have opportunities for those to be also somewhere out farther east of here, so we give people an opportunity to participate that are farther east?
Well, we are only planning to have so we have the open house meetings next week in Pecos and Presidio, of course, but then after that, we didn't have any other public meetings planned that we will be facilitating outside of El Paso, and mainly the concern was just in terms of managing budget and available funding through the Task 10 public participation task. We had talked about at one point sort of sending out materials to community members and encouraging community members to hold their own meetings to engage with the public and get feedback directly, that way. But in terms of what we are able to do in person, we're planning to primarily hold the meeting in El Paso and encourage anyone who may be able to join. They can join at that time. And if anyone has any other comments or feedback in terms of how we can make that more accessible, we can certainly think through that.
I would think that, just as a thought, that especially for that public feedback on the draft August, September, that you ought to at least consider doing one somewhere well east of here. I hear what you're saying, maybe focus on that if, depending on what kind of feedback you get from these remote groups that you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah,
I
that's a
just,
good.
I don't want them, I don't want people east of here to feel overlooked. I keep pursuing that, and I probably said it enough, but I'll keep saying it.
Okay, yeah, we will definitely be, we'll talk through that a little bit more, and see how we can maximize participation in that process.
Thank you.
Sure.
Real quick, Brian, with that, I would think that would be covered under the additional funds that received from the tasks. So I'm just thinking that maybe we could we can discuss with you in terms of what it looks like for El Paso to see how we could assist in replicating that for the other communities, even if because if you all are looking at doing this in person in El Paso, then maybe we can have a virtual component where maybe you would do the same for another community, but the COG staff could be there physically with the group if we do that outside of El Paso. And maybe we can coordinate this with Levi looking at somewhere in the Odessa area, and then we can even look at somewhere maybe in with Del Rio with Carlos. So I'll just throwing that out as a possibility.
Okay. Yeah. Well, good ideas. All right. So then I think we already talked about this in our earlier conversation regarding the subcommittees, but we do have, this is kind of outdated now given that conversation. So, so moving on to the Fathom 3-meter flood risk data. So we have, since December, we were able to identify some issues with the original 3-meter Fathom data set that was resulting in long processing times. And we did meet with the development board in January to discuss what we encountered and what we found. We provided some recommendations, and ultimately the good news is we were able to work through methods to process the data more efficiently. And so now I know that in December we were considering only focusing on applying that data set to specific areas, but now we're able to apply it to the region. So that's a good breakthrough there. And here's a view of the region, just kind of showing what those we haven't had a chance to process the 1% annual chance 3-meter data set for the whole region, both pluvial and fluvial. So that's just a view of that here, and we're going to be incorporating that into our task 2 geodatabase deliverables that will be presented later this month. Okay, and then now I'm going to ask Barracuda, Patricia, if you're able to share a little bit about next week's meetings.
Sure. So we're set for February 9th and February 10th, first in Pecos and Presidio. We have already, done all the pre-work and sent everything to stakeholders, all of that good stuff. We had ads that ran in the January 6th issues of the Big Bend Sentinel, Presidio International, and Pecos Enterprise. Annette, I will go ahead and send you copies of that so you have records of it. We're going to reissue a press release to the area media this week, I believe, so that we can hopefully get some more interest and coverage on this. And we still have, sorry?
Can I, if I could interrupt real quick, somebody has their mic open.
I think it's Chris.
Okay, there you go. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And then we are still running Facebook ads on the data survey, and that will be running till April 22nd. And then we also have Facebook ads running for each of the meetings, and that's targeted to the appropriate counties.
I would say that if likes are any sort of indication of something. We're getting more likes with the flood planning notices on Facebook from this area than we did in El Paso. So hopefully that will mean that maybe people are interested in attending the event. So usually we're getting some comments that are probably not as positive as we would hope, but for this region, people do seem interested in the event. So I just wanted to make that comment as well.
And that's great. That means that our targeting is definitely working. So that's good to hear.
Great, thank you, Patricia. So now we're going to talk through the budget briefly, and just to summarize, we're pretty much between 70% to 80% complete with the tasks 1 through 4. A lot of that work went into developing the tech memo, and so we've marked the task 4C as 100% complete since that was submitted. So we are continuing, as I mentioned, to work through the chapter write-ups for the various tasks, and we'll be delivering those in the coming months. And so in the next couple months as well, we're going to be shifting focus into task 5 and working through the recommendations. And then I should mention at the last line here, the total percent complete, that does not account for the budget amendment for tasks 11, 12, and 13. So that total will change, which will affect our percent complete. But does anyone have any questions on the budget table before we move forward? Okay, well, I guess I'll hand it over to Chris then for summaries of subcommittees 3 and 2.
All right, thank you, Brian. Go ahead and get to the next slide. So this is from the, I believe it was January 12th, Subcommittee 3 meeting. And just a quick overview of the agenda. Basically, so again, this was Subcommittee 3, which is focused on FMEs and FMSs. And we were following up from the last Subcommittee 3 meeting, which was back in November, where we sort of had a workshop where we had stakeholders from City of El Paso, from IBWC, from Hudspeth County, give their accounts of what happened during historical flood events. In El Paso, we looked at the 2006 storm and the recent one in 2021. We talked about what could have been better, what was done well, what could be improved, what are the needs that these early warning systems or flood management entities have at this moment in order to make things better the next time there's a flood event. How could it go more smoothly? Where it was kind of the general feedback that we were looking for, and it was very successful. We thought we got a lot of really great ideas out of that meeting in November, and so this was the meeting that we recently had in January, was to follow up on those needs that were identified and put them down as evaluations and strategies that came out of those to address those needs. So that was the main overall purpose of this meeting. We did at the end have a few other discussion items, which included talking about some of the risk in areas that don't currently have FEMA floodplains and how those might be a future FME. We also talked about TxDOT and some of the information related to their projects that are available and how we're going to utilize that information. And we talked about dams in the area and how we might modify one of the FMEs that we had related to dams and their needs. Go ahead, next slide. So this was our list of strategies that came out of the workshop that I mentioned. I won't go through and read each one of these, but basically we kind of went through and talked about each one of these and listened for any comments or any edits to these from the subcommittee members, and we did receive a couple minor edits, mainly to wording, and some just minor corrections on which cities said what. But we also handed out a spreadsheet in advance of the meeting, which had these listed. So the subcommittee members had some time to review them and decide on any comments that if they disagreed with the strategy that came from the certain needs specified. Next slide. These were the evaluations, the FMEs that we identified, again, based on the needs that were talked about in that last workshop. And some of these might overlap a little bit with the FMEs that we had identified outside of the workshop, which were the ones in the tech memo. So we are going to go through, and we've already kind of done a first pass at this, but some of these might get combined with some of the other FMEs that we had if they were similar, just so we don't have we're not duplicating efforts here. But this was the list of FMEs that came out of that workshop. So these are all mostly going to be additional to the ones that we included in the tech memo. The tech memo didn't cover these, but as I mentioned, there was some overlap between the two. Next slide. So then, as I mentioned, Brian talked about the other areas besides El Paso County that are within our region, and a lot of them don't have current FEMA flood maps, or they're very out of date. And so we listed those counties here, and we discussed the idea of creating an FME to address flooding those issues in those areas. And we can go ahead to the next slide. We showed this overall map, which identified clusters of buildings within the region and where they were more dense than others. And there's this preliminary table on the right that was based on the 30-meter fathom data set. We've now refined that floodplain to be based on 3 meters. So these numbers are going to be changing, but this was just a high-level overview of, these are the top cities or incorporated areas. I believe it includes unincorporated areas as well. Is that right, Brian? This is basically the number of buildings that were in the 1% floodplain, 1% annual chance floodplain, based on that old 30-meter fathom data set.
Chris, what's the blue represent?
Those were the top 10 top 10 communities within our list outside of El Paso that we wanted to focus on.
Oh, okay.
Based on buildings affected in the floodplain. And I don't think this list includes the unincorporated areas, but I might be incorrect with that.
Okay. All right, we can go to the next slide, I think. This is just an example of one of the cities that we zoomed in on. All these ones that are highlighted in blue, as Brian mentioned, were the top number of buildings that were in the floodplain outside of El Paso County. So we went through each one of these cities that are highlighted in blue and looked at a map, such as this one from Alpine, and showed the buildings that were in the floodplain. And as we discussed in the meeting, it's based on Fathom data. So it's not a detailed model, but one of the advantages to the Fathom is that it helps you identify, where it looks like there's significant flood risk, so that you can then do a more detailed model. So that's basically what our FME will be proposing, is to do more detailed studies in these top cities where the Fathom data is showing that there's a significant number of buildings in the floodplain. Next slide.
And I'll just add real quick, the asterisks here on the table, such as Pecos and Kermit, and all the others represent communities without the FEMA flood maps, without current FEMA flood maps. So if you look at the cities that are both blue and have an asterisk next to them, those would be the cities that are potentially have a high impact to buildings in the floodplain, and also don't have any FEMA flood maps. So that's an interesting sort of comparison there between those two factors.
All right, and as I mentioned, the end of the meeting, we discussed dams. And so this was one of the slides where we identified approximately 106 dams within our region, where 27 of those were identified by TCEQ as hydraulically inadequate. And another 28 additional dams were identified as the hydraulic adequacy was not determined. And we coordinated with TCEQ to find out, well, what is that? Why would it be considered not determined? And it was based on if the proper H&H modeling wasn't conducted yet. Sometimes there was a configuration issue, like something had changed within the dam. Maybe the spillway had been eroded or constructed differently, modified. If there were some changes to the drainage area, maybe diversion channels were added, which changed the contributing drainage area to the dam, or if there's just general uncertainty about whether it can safely pass the design storm at this point after suffering from erosion. These are all issues that might lead into why a dam was hydraulic adequacy is not determined.
Hey, Chris, we have a chat comment that on that, I think on that previous slide. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure who it was who made the comment, but
That was me.
Okay,
Jeff,
do you want to, Jeff, did you want to?
It's just a very poor map. It doesn't really capture the floodplain well. And, you know, I see that Alpine did not make the list of communities with poor or outdated floodplain maps. But yet there it is. It's outdated and it's poor. Yeah, so, you know, I don't know what else to say, but that.
Yeah, so I'll just mention that this again was based on the earlier version, or the cursory Fathom data, which was had 30-meter resolution, and we've since been able to process the 3-meter resolution. So the map actually looks a lot better than this. I don't know, Brian, if you want to pull up a little preview of the version of this map that we're going to be showing at the public meeting. But we can circle back to that if you want to see what that looks like.
Just a quick point. There are a lot of buildings that aren't included there that I know are in flood risk areas, and there are some that you've got included in flood risk areas that there's just no risk of flooding. I've lived here 20 years and I've seen all sorts of events, and there's just some real problems with that. And you know that may not change. That may not change what y'all do, because you know we can't make new floodplain maps right away, but there's just real issues with that map.
Right, and that's exactly the type of feedback that we're hoping to get at the public meetings, and that we will follow up with you to maybe document, because you know, that's why we printed out maps like this for the public meetings. We're going to have them on big roll plots so people can go and see their house and say, this is not in the floodplain. I don't know why you all are showing this in the floodplain, because this is actually a combination of the 100-year FAFDS floodplain, which is an approximate floodplain based on, you know, a digitization of these outdated maps. So yeah, a lot of these might not reflect what the residents know to be the primary flood areas. So I think this is our zoom inset map after processing that 3-meter Fathom data set. We're going to have this on a poster board. Somebody's going to be standing next to it to talk about residents. And if they say, hey, my house is over here and it floods all the time, but it's not shown in the floodplain, what we will do is direct them over to the roll plots, which will be in a different room, and they'll be up on the wall. They'll be for all the incorporated areas. People will be able to look at aerial imagery and find their house and their street, and they can put a sticky note on there and say that, you know, we disagree with this. We know that it floods here, and then what we'll do is after or during the meeting, We're also going to have laptops set up. We'll be able to add that to our website, our GIS-based website, as a polygon, as a known flooding area that's not showing up in the maps. And then all of this will be taken into consideration when the FME that we're proposing is actually performed, because we're proposing a more detailed study. And so we'll take all that into consideration when that study gets performed and say, well, you know, we know that flooding happens here, but it's not showing up in our floodplains. Why not? So thanks for that feedback, and we'll
Sure.
like I said, we'll follow up with you to get more specific locations and put those into our map, our GIS map online. So just to wrap up this slide, what came out of it, you can go ahead and move to the next slide here. We basically tweaked one of our FMEs. It was FME number 13 in the tech memo that we submitted January 7th. And we basically had only included hydraulically inadequate dams in this study to evaluate all the dams that were hydraulically inadequate. What we did was we changed it to or not determined, because we didn't want to ignore the dams where the hydraulic adequacy was not determined. So that was what this potential subcommittee recommendation for vote was just to add this or not determined to that FME. Then we talked a little bit about the TxDOT data and how we incorporate it. It's kind of its own animal, these TxDOT projects, because every TxDOT project has a drainage component because it's a roadway. But how do we pick out, you know, the studies or the projects from TxDOT that belong in the regional flood plan? And so we talked about how there is a database online for bridges or bridge class culverts, and there are 2,520 of them in our region, and they have different attributes or information associated with each bridge. And one of them is the waterway adequacy, which is defined in the TxDOT code book. And depending on the score that they have in this field, it can tell you occasionally, or it can tell you the frequency of overtopping of this bridge. And so we thought that was a very powerful data set that we can use to when we're looking at low water crossings or critical routes as part of this regional flood plan. We can look at these bridges or bridge class culverts and identify, you know, which are the ones that TxDOT has already identified as having flooding issues. So we just talked a little bit about that and how we're going to use that. Next slide. So the recommendation that came out of this subcommittee meeting was basically the subcommittee recommended approval by the general RFPG meeting group, this group here today, of any refinements to the list of FMEs and FMSs included in the January 7th tech memo, resulting from discussions in this subcommittee to recommend to the regional flood planning group. So we just had sort of a general vote at the end that we were going to accept these refinements. And again, those refinements were adding those new FMEs and FMSs that came out of the previous workshop and tweaking the language on that one dam inadequacy statement or FME that we just discussed. And lastly, we talked about for stormwater master plan projects, whichever ones were not evaluated as FMPs, that the subcommittee wanted to basically consider them as both FMEs and FMPs, so that they would qualify for funding for both being studied as an FME or being constructed if it's an FMP. And that is still pending. I know that the subcommittee expressed their recommendation that that's what they would like to do, have them as both FMEs and FMPs. However, we're not certain at this time whether TWDB will allow that. So we have asked the question to Richard, and he's passed that on to other members of the TWDB. And we're waiting to get feedback on that, along with some other questions. He's given us some general feedback, but yeah, we're still waiting to find out if we could have recommendations of certain stormwater master plan projects as both FMEs and FMPs. So I don't know if Richard, if there's any updates on that, or we're still just waiting at this point.
Still waiting. The questions are still being reviewed by James and Reem, my supervisors. Again, stated that a lot of questions regarding future financial state assistance are yet to be determined and depend on legislative action. And yeah, getting into these nitty-gritty details between FMEs, FMPs, waiting for final response from them.
Thank you. All right, next slide here. So yeah, we already talked about this. We voted on the next subcommittee meeting being around February 21st through 24th, but we're going to scratch that and just have the next general RFPG meeting on the 28th, where we'll loop into that any discussions on the FMEs and FMSs.
Chris.
Okay, Chris, just a question or comment. If we're pending a response from the board on both FME and FMPs, then we can't really vote at this point as you're in item 12 for subcommittee 3 action?
Right. So at the end of this presentation, we were going to hand it back to Annette to see which items from the subcommittees this general RFPG wanted to vote upon. And yeah, that one is in there, but we could probably scratch it off the list, seeing as how it's still pending approval from TWDP.
Okay, then so we can correlate the vote to the discussion. I'm suggesting that we table item 12 pending the response from the Texas Water Development Board.
And I guess one clarification there is that we could probably table just this bullet here. It's sort of a sub bullet under this more general item here. So I guess when we vote on it at the end, what we're going to recommend is that we just vote on this approval of, or if you go back to that last slide, 39. Oh, sorry, that's not right. Maybe, yeah, where's the subcommittee 3 one? Did we get it in there? Yeah, this one. So for this slide, what we'd probably do is just delete that bullet at the end, which talks about stormwater master plan projects. It's appropriate to include projects that do not get fully evaluated. We'll probably just take that out. Yeah, scratch that out and just vote on this general one.
Okay, so to avoid any confusion in memory here, why don't we take care of the vote on 3 now that we've finished discussing 3, and then discuss 2 and vote on it? How's that sound?
Yeah, we're fine with that. However y'all want to do it. We're kind of up in the air. We're sure the best way to do that, but that works.
Okay. Is there anybody that's willing to submit a motion right now on that?
So moved.
That slide. So we've got a motion to approve the RPG actions to vote number 1, subcommittee 3, dam safety, proposed change to FME 13, et cetera, according to that paragraph, and approval of any requirements to the list of FMEs and FMSs, et cetera, to the second paragraph, with the to include removed. And I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second, Omar.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes for recommendations from subcommittee 3.
All right, thank you. Okay, now we'll just get into the 2 subcommittee 2 meetings that we had. The 5th and 6th meetings for that subcommittee. This was the agenda from the January 18th meeting. We didn't get all the way through the original agenda, so I've cut out the items that we didn't get through. We got through these first 8. The purpose of this meeting, or the primary goal, was to prioritize prioritize the evaluation of all FMPs in the region. And we sort of had 3 different categories of FMPs. We have the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan projects. We have the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan projects, and we have projects that are not included in any Stormwater Master Plan. And so we talked about how do we combine these 3 categories of projects and decide which ones we're going to evaluate, because there's just too many of, if you add them all up, there's over 150 projects or more. So how do we whittle that down to the most important ones that we want to include in as potential recommendations in the regional flood plan? We also talked a little bit about some of the language in the guidance, which we'll go over here in a second, which we had a good discussion with Richard about that as well. So I guess we can just go ahead and jump into that with the next slide. So we had talked about in previous subcommittee and in general RPG meetings that we were planning on submitting some projects with information left blank, because like we mentioned, there's so many El Paso City and County Stormwater Master Plan projects. We can't evaluate them all, but we would like them all to be eligible for funding through the state. So the approach we were planning on was, including them all in the plan, but for the ones that were not the highest priority, we would leave a lot of the fields blank, and that was based on language that we identified in the guidance. Next slide. However, with our discussions with Richard over the phone, he clarified that there are certain required fields that were going to be required, such as the benefit cost ratio was one of them. And basically there were very few fields that were identified in a table within the guidance. I think it was table 13 with asterisks. And he said, these are the only ones that you can leave blank. And so that sort of changed our overall approach. And so this idea of including all the projects as FMPs and just leaving some of the information blank, like the BCR, was not going to be acceptable by TWDB. So what we did was, through looking at the guidance section 3.9B of Exhibit C, they said that these are the general project data required. And we know that there's more fields from talking to Richard. However, we're basically going to focus on just these fields for evaluating first for each of the FMPs to decide if they're going to be recommended. And then we would eventually go in and fill in all the other blanks that are required. And I think the next slide shows it a little bit more clearly, but if you could, yeah, so this has a table from table 13 of Exhibit C, and these are all the required data when you're evaluating FMPs. What we did was we highlighted each column here that came from that list that we just looked at, and we said we're going to focus on these yellow highlighted data sets, and we're going to use those data sets to determine whether we should recommend a project or not when we're evaluating FMPs. And then what we have in red are the data sets that can be left blank. So eventually all the other data sets that aren't in red will be filled in, but they're just going to be a lower priority because we're going to try to jump ahead to the recommended projects as soon as we can, and then we can fill in all the other data afterwards. So I know this slide is a lot to look at. It was mainly used as a talking point, but that kind of sums up our general conversation, which was a pretty in-depth conversation, but very important to a lot of our planning group members. Next slide. Then we just talked about, for each of the categories, this is just an example of the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan. We had separated them into tiers based on thirds of the total number of prioritized projects. So this one initially had 7 projects in the top tier and 7 projects in the second tier. And one thing that came out of that meeting was that the subcommittee preferred to, instead of do it by separate tiers by a third of each category, that we should do it in equal numbers of projects, such as 5 projects. We thought would be a good number for tiers. That way, it's the same number of projects for each category, rather than having a different number based on a third of the total number of projects. So this all changed in the next meeting. This is just an example, and I think that pretty much sums up where we stopped on this subcommittee 2 meeting. We sort of ran out of time after our discussions on the guidance that we just covered before this slide. Go ahead, next slide. So the only vote that we had, or recommendation for the RPG to vote on, was that we would create tiers according to each project category, as being 5 projects in each category, rather than the third of each projects, a third of each category. So we can cycle back to this at the end, I think, after we talk about this one. But this is the follow-up meeting to that, is sort of part 2, subcommittee 2 meeting that was held on the 27th of January. Again, we had the same goal: establish prioritization for all FMPs. On this one, we went through a revised list of prioritized projects from the city and the county after we had separate meetings with them, saying, look, it's likely, we know that we can get through these top tier. We want to make sure that your top priorities are in your top 5 projects. And so there was a little bit of shuffling around of those prioritized projects. So we went over those new priorities for the city and the county. And then we talked about, since the projects that are not in Stormwater Master Plans, it's not really accessible for someone to go read about them and look at them on a map. We went through each one of those in detail. There were 11 of them. We showed maps, we scored those projects, and we ranked them as part of this project. Then we talked about how much budget we have overall remaining for this task, and how much it would cost for each of these evaluations based on the combined list of projects. And then we talked about the method for combining them all, and how many end up at the top and second tiers that we're planning to evaluate, in the order of evaluation. Next slide. So this is just the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan projects. The ones that were highlighted here were the ones that EP Water chose to shuffle around as far as the priority, to make sure that the most important projects in the region ended up in this top tier of projects. So the ones that are highlighted here were swapped basically between the last meetings. And so that's all this slide is showing. Next slide. Again, with EP Water, I'm sorry, this is for the City of El Paso EP Water projects. After reprioritizing them, we kept the order of priority in this far left column, but again, we separated the tiers up by 5 projects at a time, and within each tier, we sorted them by the level of effort we expected the evaluations to take. So in this far right column is the level of effort, and so they're sorted by easiest to most difficult to evaluate. And we sorted them again the same way within tier 2 and within tier 3. So just to summarize, they're no longer sorted by priority. They are sorted by level of effort within each tier. This is where we landed on the City of El Paso EP Water. We did a similar exercise for El Paso County. These 3 numbers that were highlighted are revised since the previous meeting, as far as priority, to make sure that the most important projects are in the top tiers. And so we just kind of went through those minor changes there. We can get through the next slide. So this is where we end up with the El Paso County projects. Again, we've got 5 projects in each tier now, and within each tier, we sorted by the level of effort from lowest to highest. We talked about what went into these scores for level of effort in each one of these top tier projects. We kind of went through that in the previous subcommittee 2 meeting. Next slide. And then, so that, lastly, these are projects that are not in any stormwater master plans. We had to come up with a way to prioritize these because we had come up with a method that was in our tech memo, documented in our tech memo, that had these categories, and we said that we would score them based on these numbers at the top, total number of points to award them. We've hidden some rows here that had to do with permitting, but we considered the complexity of different types of permitting. There were several additional columns included here. We sent these tables out in advance of this meeting, along with the two previous tables that we just sent, so that the subcommittee members could review the scores. We have a lot of highlights in here because it's qualitative, so it's judgment. It's based on judgment, and a lot of these are debatable. So we wanted to just highlight things that we had, cells that we had changed some of the scores on after meeting with some of the subcommittee members. And we just wanted to emphasize the fact that, again, these are judgment based. If anybody had any strong opinions, then we could update this score, and it would kind of reshuffle the prioritization. But based on where we landed, this is the ranking of prioritization for projects that are outside the Stormwater Master Plan, from 1 to 11, and they're described here on the left. And so again, we kind of went through each one of these and talked about what the project entails, where it's located. We looked at a map. Where did the idea come from, and how did we score it in this overall prioritization ranking? So this is where we landed with the projects that were outside stormwater master plans. Again, after separating them into tiers according to priority, and then sorting them by level of effort. This is sort of the order in which we're going to evaluate these projects. Next slide. Then we looked at the remaining budget. We're at 64,000 at the time that was remaining for task 4A, B, and C. And we did talk about how there is an additional contract amendment for about 600,000, and 116,000 of that is available for tasks 1 through 10. However, if you are using the money for anything other than outreach and data collection, then you did need approval by the general RFPG. So what we talked about was basically, and again, there is additional funding of that 600K, about 350 will be available for task 12 to actually perform some FMEs after the draft submittal in August. So we'll eventually determine what are the most important FMEs we want to actually perform to get in the amended plan, and then about 200,000 of that will go towards the process of adopting those changes to the amended plan, which again will take those top priority FMEs and turn them into FMPs, so they would be available for construction funding if they're included as recommended in the plan. So the big picture, what came out of this discussion was that we have 116K we can add to task 4, and we think that according to the amount of time we have, we could probably take up to half of that, which would be 58K, and apply that towards task 4 to allow us to evaluate as many of these prioritized FMPs as possible in the overall order of evaluation. So next slide. So this is after we combined all 3 categories. Again, City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan, El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan, and projects that are not included in Stormwater Master Plans. We basically took the top tier of each of those categories and we alternated between all 3 of them. So we sorted according to these 3 column headers in red, and the number that's next to them in parentheses is the order of sorting. So we first sorted by tier, so we know that all of our top tiers are together in each category. Then we sorted by level of effort, the overall level of effort ranking that we talked about in the previous slides, and then third we sorted by the different category, just to make sure that we alternated between each category. So we have this is basically the overall order in which we're going to evaluate all the projects here, as you see here. And one of the changes that came out of that last meeting was that we would move up this last project. It was in tier two because we had 5 projects in each tier. There were only 15 projects here, but since it was part of the projects outside of El Paso County, and it was a fairly small project, not a lot of effort to evaluate it. We moved it up into tier 1 so that it could be evaluated in tier 1. One thing we didn't really talk about yet were these color codes, but this is basically the complexity of the project. It's a little bit different than the level of effort, but we assigned costs for each one of the evaluations, how much we thought it would cost based on the hydrologic or hydraulic modeling involved, the number of buildings that were at risk when we're considering the benefit cost ratio. And over on the far right column, we have a cumulative fee. So basically we just added up this fee for evaluation to whatever the total was in the previous row, and this would give us an idea of, as we move down this list, how much is it costing us, and that's what helped us come up with that number of about half of that 116K, because we think that 98K is what it would cost to do the evaluations. And so if you go to the next slide, this is, yeah. Is there a question?
Oh, you just,
Okay.
yeah.
Hey, Chris, did
Yes.
did you include remember there were 2 items that were up there above the cutoff line at 98K that were commented on by Giselle, I think, that the state was going to fund and
Yes.
or potentially fund. And did you adjust those?
Right. So there are a couple projects in here that are TxDOT projects. One of them is in this top tier. It's this SH20 project, drainage improvements. So Mesa Street in El Paso had a study performed by AECOM where we identified 14 crossings that needed to be improved. And Isela brought up an excellent point, since TxDOT is a state entity, would they be eligible to apply for state grants or for grants that were administered through the state? And so I don't know, Richard, has this come up in other regions? As are they taking TxDOT projects and including those as FMEs, FMPs? Basically, our answer was that we think that's a good question, and we were planning on following up with TWDB and TxDOT on some of these projects now that we know their level of priority for being studied and evaluated. So I don't know, Richard, do you have any feedback on that, whether TxDOT projects are eligible to be recommended in these plans?
I am not aware of any region currently doing that. I can check with the other planners of the other regions to see if they've heard anything. But I can definitely ask and let you know.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, that was sort of a pending item on this one. But if you go to the next slide, which is
the thing that I wanted to make sure he understands is that if in fact that item is removed from the list, that allows us to add an item from tier 2 up into tier 1 and still meet the limitation of funding for analysis or evaluation.
Right. So that was related to taking that top project from tier 2 and moving it into tier 1. That's why we did that. And this is the other one, the FM 170, that is also a TxDOT project. And it has a total cost of $49 million to improve over 163 low water crossings and 9 culvert crossings. So it's not really realistic that we would be able to fund all of that as one big project, but we might be able to choose a priority of those 163 low water crossings and maybe study the top 10 or top 15, whatever we decide. So again, that's going to be a discussion that we have with TxDOT and with TWDB, depending on whether that's something that would be eligible for funding if we include it in the plan. But all the ones that we have highlighted in red here and in the previous tier, which is tier 1, those are all projects that are outside of El Paso County, and we understood through discussions that that's a high priority to include projects that are not within El Paso County, because we have so many projects already within El Paso County. We want to make sure to have equality throughout the region. So again, that was part of the decision to move the top project from tier 2 up into tier 1, because that one was outside of El Paso County.
Yeah, that's red in FMP name column, not in project complexity column.
Correct. Thank you. Yep. Thanks for clarifying. And so again, if we got through all of the projects in tier 2, we're estimating conservatively that we think that would take about 190K, which we just don't have budget for at this point. So the sort of summary that came out of this is that we think we can get through all of tier 1 projects. And then based on how much we've spent at that point, we'll continue going down the list here for tier 2, but it's unlikely that we'll get through all of the projects in tier 2. This is the overall order of evaluation that we'll go by. Next slide. And there was a tier 3 to tier 4, but we didn't even cover those since we likely, those were included in the spreadsheet again that was sent out in advance for review before the meeting. But yeah, since it's not likely we'll get to those, we did show those as slides. The recommendations vote that came out of this were approving the overall refined prioritization tables from the city and the county, and also from the stormwater master plan projects outside, or the projects outside of stormwater master plan projects, and also what we're calling Alt 3, which was that last set of projects that we just showed the first and second priorities for. We're calling that Alternative 3. So basically, we voted to approve that list of overall prioritization for evaluation. And we also voted on approving up to this 58K to be used as needed towards task 4, because again, that's out of the 116,000 available for tasks 1 through 10. If it's not one of the, if it's not going to be used towards public outreach, then you need approval by the general RFPG to use it for other tasks. So we'd like to use up to 58K on task 4 as needed. And so that was also voted on to recommend to the RFPG for voting. So here, I think that covers it. Now at the end here, we're just gonna kind of wrap up. You can get to the next slide, Brian. Agenda items 12 and 13 are basically just action to vote on the subcommittee 3 actions, which we already did. So the second part of this is to vote on the subcommittee 2 actions that were recommended by the subcommittee. So again, to summarize, those are creating tiers based on 5 projects rather than by a third of each category, to approve this Alternative 3 overall prioritization table, and to approve applying additional funding of up to 58K towards task 4 as needed for recommendation to the RFPG. So I'll hand it back to Annette, unless there are any questions about what we covered here in the last subcommittee 2 meeting.
Assuming there are no questions, then.
Someone's speaking, but I don't know if they.
Oh, somebody was trying to speak and didn't.
Sal, were you speaking to the group? No. Okay. All right. Very good.
All right. I guess we need a motion from the group to accept the items that are on the slide, RFP actions for vote 2, subcommittee 2, FMPs. 3 paragraphs, approval of the creation of tiers, et cetera, approval of refined prioritization tables, et cetera, and approval of applying additional funding of up to 58K toward task 4. That's out of task 1 through 10.
I'd like to make a motion for the first 2 items that you mentioned, the approval of the creation of tiers according to 5 projects, and then the second one, the approval of the refined prioritization tables. That we can take care of immediately. And then I'd like to table the 3rd item just to make sure we check with Annette that this change in the budget is exactly what the budget adjustments that were previously made, that everything lines up. And I just want to double check. I'm sure everybody did their work, but I want to give the opportunity to Annette to take a look at that.
Okay, before we do, Dilbert has a question too.
Yeah, I know in this group I'm not a voting member, but I did have a question. So I missed some of the last couple meetings. I know, Chris, we're trying to set up that meeting to discuss IBWC levy projects, and I wasn't sure how that fits into the table that's already been refined. Will it be added in later based on ranking, or it's going to be totally separate?
Right. So that's a good question because, you know, this isn't a final list that's set in stone. There are going to be additional, the potential of additional projects being added to this list. For example, we have our upcoming public meetings in Presidio and Pecos, and it is possible that, you know, through talking with some of the stakeholders in those regions, we might discover new FMPs, or they might tell us about needs that they have that might require new FMEs or FMSs. And so this overall list of projects, you know, that we're planning to evaluate is subject to change. And we have been talking with Delbert about having a, you know, detailed discussion about the IBWC projects that are planned and trying to come up with an overall prioritization of those IBWC projects. And as I mentioned, we're going to also have projects, a discussion with TxDOT and talk about, you know, whether those are feasible to remain in there. So yeah, that's a good point. How will this change when new projects are added to the list? It's basically, we're going to have to bring them up in, since we're not having subcommittee meetings anymore, they'll be brought up in general RPG meetings like this one. We'll say, these are the new projects we've identified. How do we want to insert them into this list, or what tier do they go in? And that'll be something that that we'll discuss at those meetings, which you know, will be open to input from you all. So if there's a particular way that you'd like those to be considered, please let us know. But at this point, this is all that we have. So you know, we'll be brainstorming the best way to incorporate new projects into this. But we just overall, this is what we have at this point. So when it changes, that'll be open for discussion.
Thank you.
Going back to the motion, let's go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to clarify, Delbert, we do have the consideration of IBWC projects all built into one of our, I believe it's an FME, it could be an FMS. I think it's an FME to get levy accreditation through El Paso in the El Paso County region. So they're kind of baked into that FME, and that's sort of where we think most of that discussion is going to go. Sort of, if that gives you a better idea of where IBWC projects fit into this, but it is possible some of those could come out and become FMPs.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
This is a silly question, Delbert, but is IBWC looking to apply for state funding for some of these projects?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know what the rules are on us accepting that kind of funding either. I'd have to talk since we're federal.
Does anybody have any like an answer to that? I just don't know.
Sure.
Can IBWC apply for FIF funding?
There he is.
Not sure at the moment, sorry.
Okay.
Because usually they have to be political entities of the state. And I know, and so I'm not sure on the exact like structure of IBWC and how they relate.
Dilbert, is that something you'd like to at least find an answer to?
Yeah, I can go ahead and ask and see how that works with our own mandates as a federal agency.
Got it.
Yeah, and Richard, I guess if you could sort of lump this into the TxDOT question when you follow up, if you know those entities like TxDOT and IBWC could apply for funding through any future state grant programs.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you. And going back to the motion, I'd like to withdraw the original motion. First, I said the first two items were okay. And then I wanted to table item number 3. Just look back at my notes and I realized that we're getting more than 500,000. So I'd like to revise my motion to approve all 3 items. Well, I think there's enough money to be able to handle it.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Levi Bryan.
All right. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thanks, Omar.
All right, thank you all very much. And again, thanks for all of your time that went into these meetings leading up to where we are today. You know, we realize it has been a lot of time commitment on your end, but we've received some great feedback, and so yeah, thanks again. We appreciate it.
These are on 14.
Okay, I understand next meeting dates are pretty well identified already, the 28th. And we've got to do a survey, I guess, for best day for subcommittee 2 only general membership meeting for 14 through 17. So I think those are set up.
And just to confirm, the next meeting for the flood planning group will be February the 28th at 9 a.m. And then we will submit a poll to determine what day we should have the planning group meeting to focus on subcommittee 2 items between the week of March 14th through the 18th.
14 through 18, okay.
Is that correct, AECOM?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
And 15.
And was there, versus in relation to subcommittee 4, are there any tentative dates for it? Or are we just going to kind of stand by on that?
Brian, do you want to take this one?
I think we will. I was going to suggest if anyone has any particular interest from the RPG and talking one-on-one with our group, feel free to reach out, let us know, and then we can start to coordinate individually. And like you said, Dave, if we think there's benefit in bringing everyone together, we'll recommend that at the next general meeting, perhaps. But we don't have any dates scheduled right now, or.
So you plan on setting something out maybe in March?
Yeah, potentially if needed, probably start in March.
Okay. I guess that completes our agenda, and I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Levi.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion, a second. I don't think there'll probably be any discussion. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed to quitting? All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Everybody, have a good day. Chris, just, can we stay on the line real quick? I just wanted to confirm one thing with you on the tech memo. But we can stop recording if you